All right, so let's talk redirect. What is it? Why we use it? How to do it? And what are the benefits of it? Well, let's start off with what is it? Basically, as the name would imply, it's a redirect. But the only difference is you set it up from the ground with a throw ball or a throw weight. You don't wait till you're up in the tree to do the redirect because, as many of you that have done single rope system would know, setting up multiple different redirects within the tree can be kind of a pain in the ass. It's time consuming. Not only that, but a lot of the times you have to go back in order to retrieve unless you're climbing over crotches and constantly moving your rope. But a lot of the times we just end up using slings or something to set up our redirects. And then we end up having to go back. And yes, you can set up retrievable redirects too, but like I said, it's time consuming. And for the typical production climber, the point is to save time. We want to save time, make sure that we're conserving our energy and getting as much done as we possibly can without killing ourselves as well. So the idea is to set up a route and you have to kind of choose. And so you start off how you normally would. You throw up into a point that is high enough and central enough that it's going to help you throughout the entire tree. But then you choose your route and you kind of order them in numbers, is the way that I think of it. So I'm going to, first of all, choose my main central tie-in spot. This is the spot I normally would choose when I would climb the tree. Uh, it doesn't matter if it's single rope or double rope. This is just the spot that I normally would always choose. Central, high tying point. That's the ideal time spot every single time. You choose that, get your rope up in there, and from there, you have to start deciding, okay, how am I going to work the tree? And that all depends on what you're doing. If you're going to be pruning the entire tree, then you have to kind of set up a route and then kind of decide, okay, I'm going to start here and go there and finish here last. Now, where you normally would start would be the last place that your rope is going to be set up in terms of the pre-direct. And what I mean by that is, for example, here in this hackberry, you guys saw where I climbed up. This was the last spot that the rope was pulled down through. Where I started was actually setting up in the walnut. That's where I set up my basal anchor. And so there was this nice wide open crotch. It was high and it was directly behind the hackberry. And I felt like it would help me if I needed that extra height and pull backwards as opposed to setting it up directly into the hackberry. And in a way, it did end up helping because I was able to do that right side with little uh, effort or exertion of energy because I had a nice little tying kind of pulling me back to the side a little bit, which helped supported me in climbing on that right side. And you're gonna see too, it was wrapped around a small little limb on the hackberry that I was making pressure on there. But that's another cool thing about this pre-direct is it gives you options. You can set up in spots that you normally wouldn't put a basal anchor onto. I mean, the walnut in and of itself was moving too much for me to feel confident in climbing, and it was too far out. And as a lot of you know, or you should know, when you basal anchor, the spot in which your rope is around a given union, you're putting double the weight that you normally would just doing a canopy anchor. So you have to keep that in mind. And with the pre-direct, a lot of the time when you're climbing, you're putting that pressure in multiple different areas. So like I said, it gives you options. You can tie in on smaller stuff or pre-direct into smaller stuff. And obviously you have to keep an eye on the pressure that you're putting onto stuff. But in a lot of cases, you're actually putting the pressure on multiple different places and it kind of evens the weight that you're putting on those spots, so the branches are less likely to break. And you can see that once I climb over to the other side, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about with that little limb. But yeah, the only hard part about this is just having the idea in your mind, realizing that, okay, I got to pick out my route. And you should be doing this as you're working anyway. You got to already have kind of an idea of how you're going to work a tree. If it's a really wide tree and you're doing the entire thing by yourself, then, like I said, start with the central tie-in spot and then pick your route for one side of the tree. Do that route, and then as you're at the very top, then you can descend and then work the other half of the tree. But in this case, I'm doing clearance work. It's just one side. And as you can see, I picked this left side to do first. That's where I climbed up in. And now I'm hopping over to the right side because I'm finished with what I was clearing on the left side. And here's that small limb I was talking about. If you pay attention, it actually wraps around that small little branch and into that big union on that walnut on the right. And you can see it runs down to the basal anchor. So I can put pressure on my rope and still feel secure enough to hop up over here. And you normally wouldn't be able to do it. I think just have a singular tie-in spot with a basal anchor. Because, like I had already mentioned, it's double your weight, so that link's a lot more likely to break. And in fact, I would never tie it like that on a normal basal anchor if it was just one spot. But see, it helps me climb over here on the right, finish working here. Now I'm able to do this. And here's a neat little trick too for some of you newer guys. If you don't carry a sling with you, here's just one reason why you should. As we all know, good work positioning will result in a lot better work habit. So that way you don't have to one hand, you don't end up cutting yourself. And look, there's nowhere to position my foot real well. So I'll just make a little foothold for myself in here. Now I can cut comfortably and still double time. So I'm just giving you a basic overview of what to expect, how to do it. In the second half of this video, I'll actually run it down. I'll be trimming linden for more clearance work and kind of start to finish, how to set it up and whatnot. You'll be able to see that process a little bit better as opposed to having it already set up like I did in this hackberry. But yeah, the benefits of this is, I mean, moving rope system is awesome and everything. I've done it for so long and really I was just so used to it. But when my buddy Selvin mentioned this and he kind of explained the idea, it's like, oh wow, why didn't I ever think of that? It just makes so much sense. And it really does change the game because then you can SRT just about everything. And having less friction on your rope helps so much because sometimes with moving rope system, when you do redirects, all that friction can actually hinder you and your movement in the tree. And with this, you don't ever have to worry about that friction because it's not going to affect you in any type of way. But yeah, got cut with the silky there. You already know you got to pay your price in blood when you get them new silkies, unfortunately. It wasn't anything major though. But yeah, stick around for the other half and I will explain from start to finish kind of the process of how to set it up and whatnot. You get to see more clearance work on a nice little linden. All right, so let's set it up here, and I'll freeze frame this so you guys can see it a little bit better. But I've already set up my main central high tie-in point right there in the middle, as you can see. And that's what that circle is circling there. That is the central lead that I would want in any given situation. That is the highest point. That's the one that's going to help me out the most. The two red lines indicate where I have the rope set up already. And if I wanted to, I could ascend directly up there and probably do all the work. But then I'd have to limb walk. And the limb walk would kind of suck on that left one because it's very long. The tip of it looked dead to me from the ground, so I was nervous about it. So I broke it down into two sections, and that's what I'm circling here. One section on the right, one section on the left, in order to work the tree, and I'm doing clearance for the building. So as you can see here, I've numbered them off in order of how you would put your rope. One would be your central high tie-in point. Two is the second place that I chose I would put the rope. And third would be the last place, which would be the first place I would ascend. So that's the order that I would set it up. 1, 2, and 3. And the order you would actually work it would be the opposite. So 3 would become 1. That's where I would ascend. 2 would remain the same. And 1 would become 3. That would be the last spot that you would end up after you've taken out all the other redirects that you've set up as you're working the tree, which ideally would be the highest tie-in point in most cases. But yeah, we'll end the freeze frame and then I'll show you a little more about the actual work and kind of the thought process too of where I want to set up these redirects that would help me the most. So the nice thing about setting it up is you don't have to be perfect with the throw ball. It does help immensely if you can get a little bit of a finesse on it, set it up properly. But if you takes you a couple more tries to set it up, the beauty of this is that even if you have limbs in your way that might cause friction here and there, it won't be that end of the world. Just keeping in mind that if you do have small limbs that kind of put pressure on the rope and you don't take that out, and let's say you put a lot of pressure on it and you were to sit back on it, just realize that those small limbs can lead to places of slack. So you ideally do not want that. You want limbs that are going to support the rope and not create slack eventually in case you do need to put your full weight onto it, because you don't want any surprises and sit back and end up falling 5 feet and you never know. So just keep that in mind. But you don't have to be an expert with a throw ball. It just does help to set it up properly. So as you can see here, this is the second spot that I chose to run the rope through. I had that high tie-in central point. I knew I was going to have to hop over on this right side in order to get a couple of the limbs that were close to the building. So I chose an area that to me looked firm enough, and also when you're doing stuff like this where limbs can be kind of horizontal, especially on that left one, try and choose spots where you have vertical limbs and limbs big enough that you can grab and kind of pull yourself up. Because as you'll see on this left one, where I'm trying to set it up, it'd be a little bit difficult just the way I'm ascending in order to pull myself over that limb. But if I have a vertical limb that's big enough to hold my weight where I can pull on it and physically pull myself over the limb, it kind of helps you do that, because with all the gear and everything you have on you, a lot of the times pulling yourself over a limb can be very difficult. So keep that in mind when you have horizontal limbs. Try and choose a redirect spot where, one, the limb won't snap on you. I was a little bit nervous on this landing. The tip looked dead to me. As soon as I got up there, I noticed that it wasn't. It was just losing foliage a lot sooner than the other trees. So it had me cautious. That's why I chose to tie in a little bit further back. Here, I'm putting it up. I set up the other redirect, but I didn't like the spot. I felt like it was too far back where it wouldn't necessarily help me, so I ended up setting it a little bit further out. As you can see there, I'm double thinking it. But yeah, we will climb up there and see. I actually ended up putting myself closer to that vertical limb like we were talking about. And as soon as I get up there, you'll see that that vertical limb actually ended up helping me pop up over the limb. Like I was saying, I felt a little more comfortable going further out on the limb. You can see I'm putting my full weight on here. Obviously, always test your system before you go up. Make sure you don't get any surprises. It's best if you know when you put on pressure, you see the rope kind of tense up in the different places and there's not little limbs like we talked about, kind of moving up and down with the tension. It's best if you know that that tension is on those big branches, those big leads, those big redirect spots that you put onto it. That way you're not falling if a branch were to snap and, all that slack were to run out. So test your system before you go up, make sure everything looks good, and, just simple things you should know. But anyways, like I was saying, I went further out because with the pre-direct and making all these redirects throughout the tree, it made me feel a little more comfortable, regardless of the type of tree. It's a linden. Lindens aren't necessarily the strongest of woods, especially if they're dead. And that was my fear that the tip of this tree was dead, or at least dying and decaying, which from the ground, that's what it looked like to me. So I was being a little more cautious than I probably should have, but never hurts, you know. So you can see I'm putting my entire weight. The limb moves up and down, but because of all the different little redirects we put in the tree, I'm able to go up and feel comfortable enough that it's going to hold my weight. A little bit of an interesting climb here too, with all this patio furniture and whatnot in the way. That was another thing that was kind of interesting. Definitely did not make the limb walk up easy for me. But you can see I'm far enough out to where I can do the clearance work that I need. And in this case, a lot of us would think, oh, okay, let's take the whole limb back. But you end up causing more harm to a tree by taking out more. So just know more is not always better. And I came from a line clearance background, so that to us is what it was. But trees, the way that they grow is they're more prone to growing outward. So all that growth happens at the shoots and the roots, the very tips of all the trees. And by just removing the very tips of a lot of branches and obviously giving yourself enough clearance, you actually promote growth to laterals and other branches that would grow vertically. So you kind of control that growth in a sense by reducing just the very tips of it. And it doesn't take a whole lot. Well, like I said, obviously you have to work with customers and their needs as well. Sometimes they want more clearance, but in case it's up to you as an arborist, you don't necessarily have to hack it all the way back and make those ugly cuts. You can find a good lateral and start developing good growth habits in the branch by just taking off what's necessary and not so much that you're going to stress the tree out like crazy. But here is what I was talking about having vertical limb that'll help you get up. So here, I'm being careful to not cut my rope, obviously, as I'm preparing to climb over this limb and just get any suckers out of the way that might make my life difficult. And I just pulled myself up using that limb that was vertical. And here's a nice little trick for you. in this situation, I was alone. The other guys were working in a different area, and so I ended up having to do this tree alone, which I would not recommend. By the way, in case something bad happens, you won't have anybody to call for emergency. But these were easy enough trees that I felt like I could do on my own. Like I said, would not recommend, especially for newer guys, but easy enough for me to do. This limb I would have liked to rig. That's probably what I would have done if I had somebody with me. I would have had them rig it. But another practical use for a sling. I'll just rig it off to myself. It's not heavy enough where it's gonna hurt me or compromise the gear like my saddle. I'm just holding it in place so that it doesn't drop so low that it damages the umbrella down low. And you can see I get better control that way, as opposed to walking it out, because it is a little bit complicated just where my tie-in is to keep walking it out. This limb keeps one in a droop, and I don't really have a really high tie-in point, so walking it out wasn't really an option for me because I wouldn't have been able to cut comfortably. So I chose this spot to cut the limb, chose to rig it out this way, and as you can see here, I'm just kind of trying to position myself a little bit better. It is a lot of weight pulling me back, but not enough to where I can't handle it. Now I noticed there was a lot of limbs in the way. I was afraid that it might catch on the lights just to how wide the limb was. So I didn't want to throw it just completely and end up catching the lights or something. So just tie it off back on the saddle with a sling and reduce the weight, reduce the size a little bit by cutting off some of these limbs. Use your whole body. Make sure you drink water before you go up too. Doing stuff like this will give you really bad cramps. But just a little tip in case you ever find yourself in these situations where you're waiting for somebody to get back from a rotation of taking limbs out or something. Just something to kind of speed up the process, and it does take a little more effort, but I know sometimes we do find ourselves when we're trying to speed up the work a little bit, so it's a little tip for you. So I'll just finish cutting this up, speed it up a little bit, and then do a little more explanation as we hop over to the next branch once we get there. All right, so you want to hop between two limbs and you got a very large gap, like in this situation. What do you do? Well, simple. Make another tie-in. And this is where knowing how to do a Blake stitch is awesome. Unless you have a little prusik that you carry on with you with a hitch climber pulley or something like that, or another device, whatever you choose. But in this case, I just run the tail end of my rope over a union, crotch, trunk, doesn't matter as long as it holds, and make a Blake's hitch, tie that onto my saddle, and I can descend in a controlled state as opposed to taking a wild swing, because this taking a swing, it can be an option at times. Here it wasn't. If I take that swing and I'm too low, I'm going into the building, I'm running into the lights. There's just too many factors that I wouldn't have liked. And sometimes too, taking that swing with the pre-direct, you can put a lot of shock load onto your different spots of redirect, which can be a bad thing, especially if the limbs are too small. It might be enough to where those spots can actually break, or it's an uncontrolled swing, which is what you don't want. So make yourself another tie-in, tie it onto your saddle, however you decide to do that. Or in some cases too, you could even run the rope, and if you want to hold on to both ends of the rope, you can give yourself slack and then it'll lower you slowly. But I prefer to do a knot. It's more controlled. I put less strain on my muscles and I can just descend like this. Super controlled. And here I am. Now I get to ascend again. SRT, easy peasy. You guys already know. And then once I'm set up and I don't no longer need this other tie-in, I can take it off and run my rope through that crotch and then keep feeding it through these redirect spots, trying to make it back to the very first tie-in spot that I put. So here, another situation where I'm below the limb. A little bit difficult to kind of hop up over that, especially with how the rope angle is and how tight that union between the two limbs was. What I ended up doing was just running around, give myself enough slack on my main rope, and then pulling myself up around the branch, holding onto this main branch that I'm on, and then putting on my lanyard so I could loosen up the rope enough. And here, just doing a little more clearance work. This limb was low enough for me to feel like it was necessary to take it all the way back to the branch union, just because of the growth pattern of this limb as well. I felt like it wasn't necessarily gonna be beneficial to leave it, so decided to take it all the way back to the union. Do a little hinge cut here. I'm not trusting it completely. Still worried for those lights. They were real flimsy, as you guys saw, so it's kind of taking control there. Now we walk it back. As we're done here, just need to finish cleaning up those cuts. Also pay attention. I keep feeding my rope through those pre-directs. Like I said, trying to make it back to that main tie-in. It'll make your life a lot easier. I mean, if you leave it in one or two redirects, it's fine. You'll still be able to pull it out with a basal anchor, but for me, I like feeding it back through and just getting back to that original first tie-in spot. I feel like that's the easiest way of doing things, and then you don't end up getting your rope caught, especially when you need slack. As you can see, I finally fed it all the way through, made it back to my original tie-in spot. I had to do a little more clearance on the limb over there, but as you can see, I did all the tip work on it. Now I can get back to this central tie-in spot that actually helps me do the work at the base of the limb. So you can see the both benefits of having those pre-directs set instead of having a limb walk, and also because we're pruning, I don't want to cut all these huge limbs out of the way, so it helped in that sense too, because when you do that limb walk, sometimes those little growths at the base of the tree or the branch that you're walking can disturb you, and they make your rope have these weird angles where they pull you back. But here I'm able to do the work on the full limb without having to cut unnecessarily. That should be it for the tree. That's a full tree right there with pre-directs. Set up 3, used them all, and they all came in handy. Hopefully that helps somebody, and thanks for watching, guys.